Welcome back to another episode on the Evolve podcast. This is season 2. We are super excited to be back. We are here today with Nick and Cal, who are creatives, and we are super excited to sit down with them today. So introduce yourself, tell us a little about who you are, and then just share your story and kind of what you're here to talk about.
Yeah, thanks for having us. My name is Cal, and I am a filmmaker and educator, live in Vermont. I grew up in Vermont and have worked in the video, film, TV, media industry for the past 10, 12 years, and have taught part-time at a local college, and also recently actually just stopped, but I was teaching full-time in a media arts program.
Oh, cool.
So yeah, I kind of am now jumping back into doing more freelance work and creative endeavors, and teaching still part-time, but that's me in a nutshell.
Nice. Awesome.
Yeah, so my name is Nick Wright, and I am a coach. I do life coaching using different types of spirituality, and I'm also a musician. And then I do creative projects with Cal as well whenever I get the chance. Writing, acting, stuff like that, yeah.
So share a little bit about the kind of creative process that you both have and the projects that you're working on right now.
I'm working on an album right now, and I'm also writing a book about spirituality.
Nice.
Yeah.
And that's connected to the life coaching.
Yeah.
Nice.
It's called 5 Elements of a Divinely Inspired Life. But what I know we came here to talk about today is Rat Park.
Rat Park is it's a dramatic miniseries with kind of a social twist to it, and ideally it's an impact film in that it has it raises some awareness and sheds some light on an important issue here in the state of Vermont, but also around the country, which is addiction recovery and just kind of mental health overall. So it really strives to be entertaining, but also kind of have this message behind it and allow people to better understand the topic and the subject matter, but also make it ideally a conversation starter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important. I know I've kind of done a little bit of research on addiction in Vermont, and it is a huge issue. And so that's, I think, really bold of you and really great of you to tackle this issue. That can be really sensitive to talk about, but I think the more we talk about it, it becomes more in the forefront and that enacts more change. So that's super important. We're going to show you the trailer so you can kind of see a little bit what we're talking about, the series, and before we really dive into the questions.
People ask me why I started, why I keep doing it.
Nick, where are you?
Maybe it's the feeling of being lost and alone, without a purpose. I used to think it was the chemical. Now I've come to realize it's the cage.
Where did your idea come from to start this series? And really what made you want to do something? And I know you mentioned earlier when we were talking that, this has been happening for 3 years, and that is a really long time frame. I guess maybe looking back 3 years ago, where did that idea come from to want to do this?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad that I had some time to think about it ahead of time, because it has been a long time. So yeah, it's been kind of 3 years ultimately since the first kind of idea was locked in, and and what we did was we made kind of a little pitch video or a teaser video to raise some money and start the series. But the idea for the project is, I guess I'll answer that by starting with, one of the reasons why I get excited about making media and being an artist and a creator is that I think that media can be extremely influential in a positive way, ideally. So that's kind of really what gets me excited, making content about stuff that I'm passionate about and that also ideally is influencing, the audience in a positive way. I think the original idea there, or the concept, came from a book that I read by Johann Hari called Chasing the Scream. The idea behind Rat Park, or the experiment, is it takes what is somewhat well known as the classical experiment of where we base our understanding of addiction from, which is that if you put a rat in a cage and give it 2 water bottles, one of them laced with drugs, one of them just regular water, the rat will eventually overdose and kill itself. which has led to kind of the understanding and the ideas that, if you eradicate the chemical or the drug from society, that you will solve the problem. So in the 1970s, this social psychologist, Bruce Alexander, looked at that experiment and said, thought to himself, like, well, hold on a second. You're putting this rat, which in this case was a social creature, in a cage by itself and not really giving it anything to do. So it's like, kind of, well, what else do you think it's going to do? So anyway, what they did was they created Rat Park, where they had the same 2 water bottles, one laced with drugs and one with just regular water. But they put multiple rats together in a cage, and they gave them things to do, like little tunnels to crawl through and like little, those spinning wheels. And what they found was that significantly less rats used the drug-laced water, and none of them overdosed. So it's kind of really shifted my perspective into thinking, like, is our understanding of addiction and therefore our approach to how we're trying to solve this problem, like, is that fundamentally missing something? So that kind of sparked the idea and the journey. And from that kind of, it was like figuring out, how do we kind of use that idea as a metaphor and design a story around it, with characters that can kind of like build a world that can emulate those concepts and those ideas.
That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. And I think, I believe Johann Hari, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think he also wrote a book called Lost Connections. There's so many, like, I love reading those type of books and reading books where we're really like reevaluating a problem or the way we're thinking about something. I think, like, especially as a culture, we get really comfortable easily and really comfortable in a method or a process that might not even be the most effective, but we tend to be very fearful of change. That is something that's really good. And to like take that bold step to be like, okay, like, let's rethink something. Because I think there's always ways that we could be doing better, maybe not even better, but just a more well-rounded perspective. And so that's super important. What's been your role in the series so far?
Yeah, well, I think I can answer that and also riff off of what you're saying, because I think part of this project, like he's saying, that Johann Hari experiment versus the Bruce Alexander experiment was kind of the original, like, oh, it's not this, but it's this. Like, this is the problem, this is the solution. But then it's this realization of like, no, actually the solution is multifaceted. And there's a lot of angles, a lot of different perspectives. So I think what Rat Park is really going for is like the exploration of the question, how do we treat addiction? How do we deal with this problem? And, AA has its own answer. 12-step fellowships have their own answer. Counselors have their own answer. Spirituality has its own answer. Personal development coaches have their own answer, and they're all sort of different, know, and I've seen things work in each of those areas and things not work in each of those areas. So I think what a really good film or TV show does is it really shows all these different perspectives that people are coming from. And it doesn't necessarily, we're not necessarily saying like, no, it is this one answer for everyone, because that's what all these other systems are kind of doing,
Yeah. And it's tough because I think like, you could have one answer that might be effective for one person, but everyone is coming from, different socioeconomic backgrounds. Everybody has been raised slightly differently. And so it is one situation or one solution does not fit all. There's a really interesting documentary called The Hungry Heart that really takes a very, it's kind of similar look into addiction in Vermont, which is a really great documentary to watch in addition to your series as well. In both of your roles, how do you keep that passion for a project? Because it, has spanned so long, 3 years, I feel like a lot of times after 6 months, we all get kind of antsy with projects. So how have you kept that passion and kind of kept that project moving forward?
I think for Cal and I, we don't need to try to stay passionate about this. We are passionate about this, and this affects us personally. And we've had personal issues with this, and we find that our family members have had personal issues with this. And quite frankly, I think the whole planet has a personal issue with addiction, and that we like to categorize certain people as addicts and others as not. But what I find is that everyone has addictions.
It is a subject matter and something that I don't necessarily have to work at being passionate about it. it's been something that is, because I have such a direct connection to it and it's so important to me. And I think it potentially could, benefit the conversation. Like putting this out into the ethos could ideally shift some conversations and allow things to move in a direction that's different than where I think we're going now, because it seems like what we're doing now is just continuing to try the same thing. And it's the idea is like, let's shake this up a little bit. Right. So that has kept me motivated for sure. But also kind of like having this go through different like phases and iterations. So like working on the pitch trailer and then like doing the actual production and then moving into the post-production side of it. So I think having an interest in all of those different areas and that entire process, the whole creative process, has allowed me to stay interested in the project versus like just being focused on really like post-production or the production side of things, or just really being interested in the writing. Like I think all of the creative process and filmmaking in general, like gets me excited, and doing those different things is awesome. So having that be like a journey has allowed me to stay excited about it. But it was, if it was like doing the same thing over and over again, it would get kind of, boring. And
it'd be really monotonous. And I think that, having all those different aspects, keeps you engaged too. And allows you to see different sides of the project, different sides of what you're passionate about. And I think that time can also be beneficial. I haven't worked on a project, for that span of time, but even when I'm working on a project for 6 months, I think that extra time can be so beneficial because you get to take a step back, even if it's for like a day or it's for a week. You come back with fresh eyes, and that's really important. As someone who has written a lot of papers and my degrees in communications, and so having to take a step back and look at things again is super, super helpful, I think, for whatever you're doing.
And I think with anyone working on a project, like you get so close to it that you get kind of blinded by some of the stuff you don't see. So I think taking a step back, I've done that multiple times, in the post-production process. And I think the first cut or the rough cut that we had is so much different than how it looks now. And I think that process has allowed the project to manifest and be more what it needs to be. And I think kind of be more impactful. And so it's been a long time, but I think that it needed that time to marinate and to have those phases of getting really close and really nitty gritty on some of the technical pieces of the edit or whatever, but then taking a step back and being well, this whole section needs to move over here, and what I mean, and then reworking,
and rearranging, and reorganizing.
So another aspect of working on a small budget independent project is not only having people wear multiple hats, but also being able to utilize people who aren't necessarily experienced professionals in their field. So advice for young creatives trying to, dive into this industry or kind of get their foot in the door would be to take advantage of every and all opportunities that you can, right? Because you never know what opportunities can come from any little thing, right? There's been so many little jobs that I've helped out on, or, a passion project that leads to some sort of job later down the road that, so it's just important to kind of keep your eyes and ears out and to connect with people and to figure out what is happening. Because there are fun, cool, creative projects happening here in Vermont. And I think if people can become more aware of that and kind of tune in and tap into that more, just the more that becomes a possibility. And the more young people that get involved with projects, they can then, foresee themselves making projects of their own in the future. And I think the more that we can do that, the more we can kind of snowball the effect and continue to grow the creative scene here in Vermont, which I would love to see happen. I know we have an awesome creative scene, especially here in the Burlington area. But, I grew up here in Vermont, and I chose not to leave for a reason to go to LA or New York, because I think that the lifestyle and the location here and the people in Vermont are I wouldn't want to live anywhere else. So I'm trying in my own little way with this project, to kind of bring the stuff that I love working on and that I, get paid to do some commercial stuff, but like, what are those really fun things? And we can do that here in Vermont. So I think stay connected, and you never know where certain opportunities can lead.
Yeah. Anyone that's looking to get into their creative work should always start by focusing on passion, like we've said multiple times, and realize that when that imposter syndrome or that unworthiness or anxiety or fear comes up, just make friends with that, let that be, and don't let that stop you. Get on the camera anyway, get up, do the interview. I was afraid before this interview, I had anxiety before sitting in this chair, and that I go on stage, I'm a musician, and I have to get on calls and coach people, and every time there's a little bit of fear that goes into that, and that's okay. And that means that you care, that means that you care about what you're doing. So you can kind of use that and get those butterflies flying in formation.
I love that. That's awesome.
You had talked about like, where did this idea come from, or where did the idea for Rap Park come from? And it's because I want to make media that I'm passionate about. I want to make media that ideally has a positive impact. And I think that film can do that, especially a narrative film can do that. And it can potentially be more effective and impactful than a documentary, because it can allow somebody to be engaged in the subject matter through characters and through a story that they might not otherwise be interested in. Specifically within Rap Park, what that theme is mental health, addiction, and recovery. And that connection, my personal connection to those themes is another motivation and spark for where the project came from. I struggled with an opiate addiction for quite a while, and then I also struggled with alcohol. And, having kind of overcome both of those addictions successfully was one of the reasons why I wanted to help tell this story and to kind of shed light on these issues, because in a way I almost felt like a personal responsibility, having gone through those struggles and overcome them, to share my story with people in hopes that it could allow people to realize that they could do that too.
Yeah. And it provides a different level of depth when you have experienced that, because you've lived through it. You know those feelings, you know those emotions, and you know how difficult that can be. Congratulations to you for just getting through that too, and being able to look back and talk about it, and being able to be at a place too where you're comfortable sharing and transforming your experiences into something that's creative, and that creative process. Being able to not only to take that step to then talk about it and be comfortable talking about it, and comfortable talking about other people, and then channeling all of that into a creative format, I think takes a lot. And it takes a lot to form that into something that is meaningful, but not only meaningful and have that be reflective of your work, but something that you are really passionate about and you're comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Having personally dealt with a lot of anxiety, and I still do, when you get to that point where you can be open about it and sharing, I feel like there's nothing bad that's ever happened to me when I've shared about that. Only good things have come from that, because then other people feel like they're not alone.
Yeah.
And I think the more we talk about it, we break down that stigma. There's so many other people around me who are also struggling with that I never knew because we didn't talk about it.
Right. To jump right off of that, I think that ties in exactly with some of the major themes of the metaphor within Rap Park, which is that, the opposite of addiction, or the opposite of maybe mental health problems, is not necessarily taking away the chemical. It's the opposite of that is connection, and not feeling like you're alone, isolated in a cage, whether that's physically or in your head, you know what I mean? So to have that connection with other people, and to have that realization that, you're going through that thing too. I don't feel alone anymore. And that in itself is it is the crux of, I think, what we're trying to get at. Let's start to be a little bit more human with each other. And I think through doing that, we'll solve a lot of problems.
Yeah. So I was thinking we got, dealing with issues of perfectionism, or dealing with an opiate addiction, but anxiety is the underlying cause of both. So you're the same.
Anxiety's everywhere. I'm telling you.
The stigma is perfectionism or opiate, but it's the same. We just deal with these underlying causes in different ways, you know? So it's all this disconnection.
Right.
And often it's been like, oh, you did opiates or you were an alcoholic, and there's like that idea of like what that means, you know? But it's like, he's really just another person that is going through some painful struggles internally, and it's just dealing with it in a different way, you know?
Yeah, and we all learn to like cope differently. We like, as humans, we're very much like have a rating system with a lot of things, and we rate certain addictions, we rate certain things higher than other things. But that doesn't mean, you know, like my anxiety journey was any like less of a struggle, right? Or like any less of an issue for me or any worse than someone else's. Another issue that I feel very strongly about is like this rating system that we tend to put on things.
Me too.
That I'm like, no, like that is still someone else's journey. And that is still hard for them. And that is very real.
I ended up in a 12-step fellowship for 7 years. And that was a very like rigid structure. And that was very separate from other people. It's like, oh, I'm this person. The old person was the bad person. This is the good person. Other people are bad too because they're not sober.
Yeah.
And like I wasn't seeing like we're all actually a lot more alike. You know, it was like it was stigmatizing me against like other people, and it was really disconnecting me from other humans. You know, and that's why I'm so passionate about the rating scale, and because I was kind of in that certain system, and like I don't want to like throw shade on that system because that helped me a lot when I really needed help. And like, I learned a lot from it, and I met some of the best people that are still my best friends to this day. But it also was like, the philosophy of it was somewhat limiting to overall growth and healing. And disconnecting from other people.
Yeah.
Throughout the process of making the project, every step along the way and basically everybody that's collaborated with us, you know, it's in some way, shape, or form, they have a direct connection to the subject matter, you know, and I think that in itself is, it speaks volumes, you know what I mean? It's like, this is clearly something that doesn't get talked about enough, but the reality is that when you do start talking about it, you realize like, oh, you're going through something very similar, or you're going through something like similar as well. And it's like, when you cut it all down, it's like, ultimately we're all kind of struggling with very similar things. So if we can kind of just take away some of the stigmas, and like you said, like not put things on a rating scale, and understand that when we're struggling, like we're all just struggling like collectively. And like, if we just could reach out a hand and help each other out and connect more on a fundamental human level, like we would realize we have so much more in common than we have different, and that it doesn't need to be an us versus them approach, or this person has a problem and I have the solution. You know what I mean? It's like, it's very fluid, and it's very flexible, and it's individualistic, and it's like helping each other is what is gonna, you know, ultimately get us out of the problem.
I kind of want to touch on this question, just switching focus a little bit. We had just briefly mentioned before we started about imposter syndrome, and what that kind of looks like in your creative endeavors. So can you both give me an example of imposter syndrome that you felt in your career, and really how you've overcome that?
If you're out there and you're like, what are they talking about? Imposter syndrome? Imposter syndrome, like meaning I feel like I don't deserve to be here, or like somebody's going to find me out and call me out on my BS or whatever. Well, it's interesting because you're like, you know, switching subjects, but it's not. It's actually the same exact subject, because underlying and cutting, like I was saying, like cutting to the root of all of these different things, like anxiety, you know, depression, addiction, whatever. It's like, ultimately it can be boiled down to a sense of unworthiness, right? And that's where imposter syndrome comes from. And that's where kind of these other things such as addiction can manifest, is not feeling worthy. Whether that's not feeling worthy of being at the job that you have, or not worthy of feeling loved, it really can be detrimental. So yeah, that's certainly something that I've struggled with throughout my career. I haven't always overcome that. And I think that's one of the reasons why I did struggle with addiction so much. But recently it's like finding those solutions is finding the connections. It's finding those people that I can connect to and relate to who have been through similar things, but then also people that I can get my anxiety and my worries and that feeling of unworthiness, I can get it out of my head and put it out into the world and into the air. And the second that you do that, it releases it to a certain degree. You know what I mean? And then if you find those people that you can connect with and that you trust and that can have like love for you, like Nick and I were just literally talking about this the other night when I was like having a moment and like feeling anxiety about something, literally talking about imposter syndrome. And through just talking to Nick about it, it's kind of like it helps it dissipate in a way.
Yeah. And the weight is shared by two people now.
Exactly. If you buy in and believe in like energy and that we are all energy and we create energy and that can be like transferred, transferring that kind of negative energy to a person that connects and cares about you and has that kind of like energy of love, like ultimately that energy overcomes the negative. Right. So, bringing it back to the story, it's like, that's one of the pieces. It's like, how do we kind of boil everything down to this idea that at times we all can feel unworthy, but through connection, we can help dismantle that and dissipate that feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. What advice or techniques would you give to someone who's kind of interested in this form of creative process and starting this kind of series, just bringing it back to the series again?
Advice for somebody starting out on an endeavor, such as like a mini series or, a film project, having the passion in something that you have a direct connection to is super important because that's going to keep you motivated. But then also being able to enjoy the process and not think too much about the end result and what people are going to think about it and how people are going to react to it. Because ultimately, like, being here and enjoying your life is what's most important, right? Like
being present.
So that's super important. But then also I think, one thing that's allowed me to get through this process and the times when I've felt it has been most successful is when I let go of the control and I collaborate and I try to bring on people that know what they're doing better than I do, So, so the idea for the project was me coming up with the idea and kind of taking a stab at the first draft of the script and then coming to the realization that it fell flat. And that's when I brought Nick on board and had him kind of work with me on the story and we wrote it. And so we ended up rewriting it together, recognizing when you're not the best at something and finding other people that are really good at that and collaborating with those people, that's super important. But then also, realizing what you are good at and then capitalizing on those things. So it's such a collaborative nature with any sort of creative endeavor that bringing people on board that you trust and that you like to work with and that you have a connection to and that are also passionate about the subject matter, like, that's super important.
Burns a healthy fire inside of you, a passion, a purpose, right? You're saying, exactly.
Struggling.
Because I talk about the elements literally, and metaphysically inside of us. And I think the fire represents the passion, the purpose, something that is lighting you up every morning. You don't have to wake up with drudgery and depression, not being excited to go to work, If we have a project that we are passionate about, especially as creatives, which a lot of times as creatives, we're not getting the monetary reward or we're not getting the credit right away when we're starting off these careers, so we have to have some type of serious passion and connection to it. And that can be likened to a fire. I did a small part of this project, which is consulting on the writing and helping Cal like with the project as like a friend and an advisor. But this guy's a wizard with the cinematography and the film skills, and he's got a really great vision. And I'm excited for people to see the project. And I think
I'm super excited now.
Yeah.
I'm like, I want to see this like now.
So we're going to release it online on September 23rd. Ultimately, we're hoping that people are excited about it. They want to see the story continue. So what Nick and I have done is actually, decided to rework the miniseries aspect of it and actually turn it into a feature film. So we're hoping to kind of put out what we've come up with so far and then expand that even further and produce a little independent feature film here, rather than kind of continue with the series. So we're super excited.
That's awesome.
And we're going to be releasing some promotional material and some teasers. And if people want to check out some more information about the project, you can go to Rat Park _miniseries on Instagram or Rat Park on Facebook. Our website is going to be launching soon, but that's going to be ratparkfilm.com.
Yeah, so my social media where I post my music and spirituality stuff is Cosmic Empowerment by Etheric.
Well, thank you both for sitting down. This was a super great conversation. We hit a lot of angles and a lot of stuff, and I know I'm super excited to kind of see the series and especially like to see where you go with it. I think this has so much potential, like we've talked about. So this is super exciting.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem.